I woke up early, just like I always do on my birthday. The first thing I did was check my phone. No messages, no missed calls. I stared at the screen for a minute too long, hoping maybe I just didn't hear the ping. But it was quiet, dead quiet. I slipped on my powder blue blouse, my favorite one. Harold used to call it my sunshine color. He's been gone almost 10 years now. I still hear his voice in the quiet moments. I walked down to the kitchen and started making pancakes. The kids loved them growing up. Extra syrup, no crusty edges. I even made enough for everyone like a fool. Brad always came by around noon on Saturdays. Kathy, his wife, would usually tag along begrudgingly. The grandkids, well, they'd rather stare at their iPads than at me. I set the table. 4 plates, forks neatly placed, coffee steaming, a tiny candle stuck in the middle pancake. I even laughed to myself. Maybe they were planning something. Maybe they'd surprise me. I could almost hear them singing. But noon came and went. So did 1 o'clock. By 3, the pancakes were cold. I checked my phone again. Still nothing. My chest felt tight, but I smiled anyway. Smiling helps, at least on the outside. That's when I realized this wasn't the first time. Last year, I blamed the snowstorm. The year before, Brad said work got in the way. But this year, there were no excuses. It was warm. It was Saturday, and it was still my birthday. I was invisible in my own life. I sat at the table until the sun began to dip, staring at the cold food and the candle that never got lit. There was a time when this house echoed with laughter, birthday songs, wrapping paper flying through the air, Harold clapping offbeat while Brad danced around like a monkey. Those memories still lived here, but no one else seemed to. Now it was just a house filled with people who used to care. I got up slowly, joints aching. I opened the side drawer in the hallway. That's where I kept it, tucked beneath Harold's death certificate and a few old tax papers. The deed. My name. Just mine. I stared at it for a long while. They all assumed it belonged to them now. That when I passed, they'd inherit it. That it was theirs in everything, but name. But it wasn't. It was mine. And suddenly, that mattered more than it ever had. I didn't feel rage. Not yet. Just a sharp, hollow clarity. They had forgotten me. For the 3rd year in a row. And I had remembered them every single day. So I folded the deed, pressed it against my chest like a final birthday gift, and whispered to myself, "This time I remember me." The next morning, I didn't wait for sunlight. I packed before the birds even started their songs. Just 1 suitcase. I didn't need much, just the clothes I actually liked, my mother's brooch, and Harold's old wristwatch. I left the framed family photos on the shelf. I didn't want them. Not anymore. The deed went into my purse. I stood at the doorway and looked back at the living room one last time. That brown couch had carried 20 years of memories. The bookshelf still had my handwritten recipe journal on the bottom shelf. But it all felt distant. Like someone else's life. Like I'd been pretending I still belonged there when the truth was I'd become a guest in my own home. I didn't leave a note. They wouldn't have read it anyway. Or worse, they'd twist it into something selfish. I got into my car and drove to town. The law office sat between a coffee shop and an old gas station. The same lawyer who handled Harold's affairs still worked there, Mr. Raymond Cook. He looked shocked to see me. I hadn't stepped foot in his office since the funeral. "I need the house deed transferred fully to my name," I told him. "No shared assumptions. No automatic inheritance clauses. Just me." He blinked. "It's already under your name, Mrs. Green. I want it notarized and recorded that way. Legally locked. No confusion. No contest." I left with the official paperwork in my bag. I walked out of there with my back straighter than it had been in years. I drove for hours. No GPS. Just old roads I remembered from childhood. I ended up by the coast, my hometown. I hadn't been back since Harold and I sold the old cottage. Everything looked smaller, quieter, like even the buildings had grown tired. I found a small rental property through a local woman named Maggie. She gave me the key without asking too many questions. I appreciated that. The cottage smelled like sea salt and lemon oil. It had white curtains, creaky floors, and a chipped blue kettle I already loved. I unpacked slowly, placing my things like they belonged, because maybe, finally, they did. I bought myself daisies from the corner flower shop. I put them in a mason jar on the windowsill. Later that night, I made myself a simple dinner, grilled cheese, and tomato soup. I ate it on the porch while watching the sun melt into the ocean. No one called, not even Brad. But I didn't cry. I didn't feel sad. I felt still. I'd left behind the noise, the guilt, the birthdays that never mattered. For the first time in my life, I didn't need anyone to notice me to feel real. Still, as I lay in bed with the moonlight falling across my face, one question whispered against my thoughts. Was I being selfish or finally free? I woke up to seagulls and the smell of salt. There was no one stomping down the hallway, no microwave beeping, no Kathy barking at the kids to get ready. Just the quiet hum of the ocean outside my window. The silence felt like a soft blanket, not a punishment. I made coffee and stood in front of the bathroom mirror. For a second, I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. Her gray hair was tied in a loose bun, her skin a little saggy around the jaw, and her eyes, God, her eyes looked tired. But they weren't dead. They were waking up. I took my time getting ready that day. I didn't rush for anyone. I picked a soft floral dress I hadn't worn in years. One Kathy once said made me look like a doily. I wore it anyway. I walked into town with no plan. No schedule. Just me and my sandals. That's when I saw the flower shop. Inside, a woman around my age stood behind the counter, arranging sunflowers in a tall vase. She looked up and smiled like she'd been expecting me all along. "You look like a daisy person," she said. "I do. Daisies don't shout. They just quietly show up and brighten the place." Her name was Lena, and she ran the shop with her niece. She handed me a small bouquet on the house. "It's for you," she said, "just because." We talked for a while, standing between buckets of lilies and roses. She didn't ask about my past, just offered me something I hadn't felt in years. Warmth without strings. Before I left, she said, "We meet Thursdays at the library. Just a few women. We read, drink tea, share too much." I laughed, politely shook my head. Maybe. But later that night, I kept thinking about her. About how easily she made me feel seen. I sat on the porch again, watching waves curl into foam, and opened my old leather journal. I hadn't written in it since Harold passed. The pages smelled like dust and lavender. I started slow. "Dear me, you're not dead yet." That was my first line. It made me laugh and cry. For the next hour, I poured my heart out. All the invisible wounds. The weight of always being strong. The years of cooking, cleaning, folding laundry, nodding politely, swallowing disappointment, and pretending I was okay. I wrote until the candle on my table burned low and my hand ached. When I closed the journal, I looked up at the sky. The stars didn't care who I used to be. And for once, neither did I. Still, a whisper lingered beneath the calm. Do I even remember how to be seen without disappearing? It was a Tuesday when the storm hit. Not the kind with thunder or rain, but the kind with Kathy's name on the caller ID. I didn't answer. Instead, I let the phone ring while I sipped chamomile tea and watched the tide roll in like it had somewhere to be. Later that afternoon, I listened to the voicemail. Kathy didn't disappoint. "Marla, this is insane. You left without telling anyone. Brad came home and thought you were hurt, or worse. And now the house? The lawyer says it's locked under your name. What are you doing?" She paused, then added with venom, "You're being cruel." Cruel. That word sat in my mouth like bitter vinegar. Kathy would know cruelty if it bit her designer heel. She never cared when I sat alone at the dinner table. She never lifted a finger while I folded their laundry. But now that the house was off limits, suddenly I was the villain. Good. Let her feel the sting of being ignored for once. Brad sent one message. Just 4 words. "Are you okay, Mom?" I stared at it for an hour before locking the phone and slipping it into a drawer. If he had to ask, then maybe he never really knew me at all. Thursday came, and so did the book club. I stood outside the library for a long minute, debating whether to walk in. My heart thumped like I was a schoolgirl again. Inside, Lena greeted me with a warm grin. "I was hoping you'd come. There were 6 of us. all women in our 60s and 70s. Joan, sharp-tongued and witty. Esther, quiet but observant. Gloria, who talked too much and laughed even more. The rest smiled with that familiar softness. Women who had lived long enough to know pain and survived anyway. We sat in a circle with mismatched chairs and lukewarm tea, reading chapters aloud and sharing pieces of ourselves like puzzle fragments. They didn't ask about my past, but they saw I had one. By the end, Lena leaned over and said, "You carry silence like armor." It wasn't a question. I swallowed, blinking back tears. "It's just habit." She squeezed my hand. "Well, habits can be broken." On my walk home, I felt something strange, a lightness in my chest, like space was opening where the ache used to live. I didn't miss the house. I didn't miss the noise or the cold stairs. I didn't miss the way they made me feel small. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't miss being needed. Still, as I stood at the edge of the shore and let the sea wind tangle my hair, one thought pressed gently on my heart. Maybe I'm not crazy after all. I don't know what made me dig through that old cedar box. Maybe it was the way the ocean wind made me ache for something deeper. Or maybe I just wanted to prove to myself that I wasn't running. I was reckoning. The box was tucked under my bed. Same one I'd carried from house to house, never opening. Inside were yellowed envelopes, curled photos, and a few letters I had written but never sent. One was addressed to Harold. I unfolded the page slowly. My handwriting looked younger, angrier. "Dear Harold, I miss the way you used to look at me. I feel invisible now. You talk more to the TV than you do to me. I'm scared I'm fading right in front of you." I closed my eyes. I remembered writing that during one of the loneliest winters of my life. He'd already been sick by then. I never gave it to him. What was the point? Another letter was to Brad. "Bradley, do you remember how you used to hold my hand in parking lots? Now I can't even get you to look up from your phone when I speak. I don't need much. Just a call. Just to be seen." I read that one out loud. It hurt. Not because the words were cruel, but because they were true. The last letter was the hardest. It was addressed to me. "Dear me, you are not weak for wanting love. You are not wrong for missing the sound of someone calling your name like it matters." I read it again and again. It felt like I was hearing from someone I left behind long ago. A version of me who still hoped, still begged for scraps of affection. I folded all 3 letters and walked down to the beach just before dusk. The wind was soft, the waves calm, like they were waiting for something. I built a small pile of driftwood, lit a match, and set the letters ablaze. The flames danced, crackled, curled the pages into ash. It wasn't some dramatic ritual. It was quiet, personal, freeing. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just watched as every word I'd been too afraid to speak rose into the sky. The smoke smelled like closure. Back at the cottage, I turned off my phone. Kathy had left another voicemail, ranting about rights and family expectations. I didn't listen to it. I curled up on the couch with my journal and a blanket and wrote a single sentence. "They only notice when you stop playing dead." I underlined it twice. Then I smiled. They were talking about me now, weren't they? Suddenly, I wasn't a ghost anymore. Still, a quiet thought surfaced beneath the calm. Let them talk. I finally found my voice. The knock came just after sunrise. 3 soft taps, then silence. I looked through the window and saw him, Brad, standing on the porch in a wrinkled shirt and scuffed shoes. His hair was messier than I remembered. He looked smaller somehow, like a man who had forgotten how to carry weight. I opened the door without a word. He stared at me for a long time, eyes glossy, a grocery bag in one hand. "Hey," he said. I stepped aside. He walked in slow, like he didn't know where he was anymore. "I brought some things," he said, pulling out instant coffee and dry muffins. "Didn't know what you had here." I sat across from him and waited. He cleared his throat. "We got home and you were just gone. You noticed?" He looked down. "Kathy's mad." I raised my eyebrows. "That sounds about right." He didn't laugh, didn't smile. Then finally he looked me in the eyes and said, "Why'd you do it, Mom? Why take the house?" I tilted my head. "Why did you forget my birthday 3 years in a row?" He flinched. Why did you stop calling unless you needed something? Why did Kathy treat me like a live-in maid while you stood by and let her? He had no answers. I leaned forward, voice steady. I didn't take the house to hurt you. I took it because it was mine. Because I needed one thing in this life that wasn't up for debate. He stayed quiet. I spent 30 years giving and folding and cooking and forgiving. I spent every ounce of myself on everyone else. You know how many years I waited to feel like someone's daughter again? Like someone's mother, not their unpaid help? Tears welled in his eyes. I didn't mean. You didn't see me. He blinked. Hard. I softened, just enough. You were a good boy once. So full of heart. Then you got tired. And selfish. And maybe I let it happen. Maybe I was too afraid to ask for more. He whispered I miss Dad. I nodded. Me too. But he left me a house, not a leash. And I'm not dying in a place where no one remembers who I was. We sat in silence. The waves kept crashing, like they were finishing my sentences. He finally stood. I'm sorry, Mom. I know. He looked like he wanted to hug me, but he didn't. He walked to the door, paused, and turned back. Do you want me to come by again? I stared at him for a long moment, then said quietly, when you come as my son. Not my burden. He left in silence. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel sorry. I didn't hear from Brad for a while, but I heard from the wind. And from Lena, who told me one morning over tea and lemon scones, honey, Kathy's been sniffing around town, asking questions, loudly. I didn't flinch. I just kept stirring my tea. Turns out they'd taken out loans, big ones, thinking the house was as good as theirs. They'd been banking on it, probably planning to sell once I passed, or push me into some home when it was convenient. But the deed was never theirs. It was always mine. Now the bank wanted collateral. Kathy was furious. She'd never worked a real job in her life, and Brad had always followed her lead like a tired little shadow. I heard through Esther, her cousin works at the city clerk's office, that Kathy even tried to file a claim against me. Called me mentally unstable and unfit to manage property. The paperwork went nowhere. Everything was in order. I had taken care of myself more thoroughly than they ever had. The silence from Brad wasn't surprising. He was never good at facing things he broke. Just left the mess behind and hoped someone else would sweep it up. But what he didn't know, I had stopped carrying a broom. A few weeks later, he came back. He didn't bring muffins or guilt, just himself. He looked thinner, older, like life had started cracking him open from the inside. He sat on the same porch chair he used to sit in as a boy, swinging his feet while eating popsicles. He didn't look at me right away. I'm losing everything. I nodded slowly. I know. I didn't think it would fall apart like this. I looked at him and said gently, that's what happens when you build your future on someone else's silence. He swallowed hard. I'm sorry, Mom. I really am. I don't even know how we got here. I folded my hands. I do. You stopped seeing me as a person. Started treating me like a fixture. Like a houseplant that waters itself. He wiped his eyes. I don't hate you, Brad, I said. But I can't keep patching holes in your boat while mine is sinking. He looked up at me, broken and bare. So what now? I stood, walked to him, and gently placed my hand on his shoulder. Now you learn how to swim. He nodded once. Didn't argue. Didn't beg. He just sat there while the sun dropped into the ocean and the breeze cooled our quiet. Maybe that was the first real conversation we'd had in 20 years. Still, as I watched him from the doorway, one thought lingered. Sometimes love means letting them fall and trusting they'll find the ground. It was my birthday again. 1 year later. This time, I didn't wait for anyone to remember. I woke up with the sound of seagulls dancing through the window. The air was cool and sweet, the kind of morning that doesn't rush you. I made myself coffee and poured it into my favorite chipped mug, the one with the faded blue flowers. At 10 sharp, someone knocked at the door. When I opened it, Lena stood there with a lopsided grin and a balloon bouquet that said, Happy 69th, Marla. Behind her were Joan, Esther, Gloria, and a few others from the book club, each holding something, cupcakes, flowers, a card, or a folding chair. You didn't think we'd forget, did you? Lena asked. I laughed. A real one. It came from the gut. We set up a small picnic on the beach, just steps from my porch. There was carrot cake, cheap wine, and too much laughter. No one was checking their phone. No one was talking over me. I wasn't an afterthought or a chore. I was the reason they came. As the sun dipped low, they lit sparklers and sang, not perfectly, but joyfully. It was more than a birthday. It was proof. I hadn't needed a mansion full of people. I only ever needed to be seen. Around dusk, just as we were packing up, I saw a familiar car pull into the gravel driveway. Brad stepped out, holding a small envelope in both hands like it weighed more than he could carry. He looked nervous, like a boy again. He walked toward me slowly. "Happy birthday, Mom." I took the card. It was simple. No glitter. No long message. Just, "You deserve better." I see that now. I looked at him and smiled, gently. "Thank you." He motioned toward the group. "They seem good for you." "They are," I said. "They never needed me to shrink." He looked down, then back up. "Can I sit for a bit?" Of course. We didn't talk about the house, or Kathy, or the money. That wasn't what mattered anymore. He didn't ask for anything, and that alone felt like a gift. We watched the sky turn pink and gold as the waves whispered across the shore. He put his hand on mine, not in apology, not in desperation, just presence. And for the first time, it felt enough. I didn't take the house to punish them. I took it because I finally remembered. It was mine all along.